Oh, really?
Mhm. Oh, sweet. Okay. There we go. We're going. I started this thing where I'm leaving the logo up now for a little bit, so it's not just my ugly face right off the bat.
Can you see my ugly face?
We can now.
Mm,
So yeah. All
cool.
right. Well, let's just start out by getting a little intro from you. Who are you and what do you do?
My name's Jacob Oster. I'm a filmmaker. I consider myself part entrepreneur, although we're at the very early stages of a media business right now. I'm an overall creative who also has kind of a pretty keen business sense. I'm co-founder of Camp4, or not Camp4 Collective, sorry, the Locals Project. I interned at Camp4 Collective, and the Locals Project is a collective of five creatives, two filmmakers, one photographer, graphic designer, and a marketing guy who want to tell brand stories. We started out doing a passion project in March, and it had some fairly good uh, um, popularity, and now we're trying to do it to do a full-time job.
Awesome. I like your. I just realized you have that seal of Washington thing behind you too. Always got to rep the Northwest.
Yeah, gotta do it wherever I go.
Nice. Well, sweet. So, what kind of stuff are you doing with Locals Project? And kind of like, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, like how you ended up kind of getting into that sort of thing? And I guess we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I mean, the Locals Project, as of now, we're doing more branded content. We just got a nice deal with backcountry.com for one of their own brands for 6 months. And we're also in pre-production phase of a trip to Cuba for 6 months, or sorry, for a month. And that's going to be more of a passion project and a social mission. But yeah, we're in the sphere, we're entering the sphere of branded content. But personally, I started out as a business major at Washington State University, and then I decided that, hey, I'm a little more creative than this. What can I do to apply my business skills, with my creativity? And a lot of so I majored in, so I changed to, it's called digital technology and culture, which is kind of a hybrid between film, photography, graphic design, web design, and a little bit of advertising. But one of the main things that we learned is the medium is the message. So along with the technical skills, we learned a lot of things that, the effect that certain mediums and platforms have on people. And so I've been able to kind of apply that along with learning more technical skills in film, but apply that sort of thinking with creating larger kind of campaigns and brand stories now.
Awesome. Real
Yeah,
quick, do you have a Sherpa Cinema hat on?
I do. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
I'm jealous. I've been trying to get some of those as well as the Sweetgrass production stuff, and I haven't been able to get my hands on
really.
any of it yet. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I snagged this when I was interning at Camp 4. I think they had a
Nice.
stockpile of them. It's pretty sweet.
Good call. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's funny that you brought up the medium as the message thing because when I had first kind of started getting into more of the media side of things, I was playing paintball a lot, and there was a lot of obey stuff that was being like stickers and just like spray painted stuff on people's gear.
hmm
And this was before Obey had kind of gotten popular. So we were seeing a bunch of the Andre the Giant as a posse, just that iconic face that Obey has.
yeah,
And I think that medium as the message thing was one of the big uh, kind of like key things that started pushing me in the direction of doing more of the media side of things and like really trying to understand how that affects people and using that as a way to kind of like get my message out and understand what other people were going through and whatnot. But I think that's really cool because there's a lot of like little tiny things just in talking with you when we've gone on a bunch of different hikes
yeah.
that are super similar to kind of like the journey that we were on, and I thought that was really cool. And it was also crazy that we met in the parking lot of that music festival.
Yeah, yeah, that was crazy, man. That was like, I'm a huge believer that the kind of stars align, based off of your mentality. And I mean, it all comes. I've never read The Secret, but from what I hear, it's all about vibration and similar vibrations are attracted to similar vibrations. And shit, man, I think we must have been on some sort of similar vibration.
Yeah,
But
no.
as far as the medium as the message, man, I think it's super interesting. And if you attack any sort of content creation with that sort of mindset, you don't limit yourself. You don't want to necessarily attack social media like you would if you're creating a short film, for example. And the way that the Locals Project kind of, without giving away too many secrets on our strategy, the way that we approach content creation among multiple platforms is that we really truly understand, how each platform and medium interacts with each other, so that our stories can live and interact with each other on multiple platforms. So, for example, we have, for our first project, we had a 12-minute ski video that dove into Jackson Hole, some of the old school skiers and new school skiers. But we allowed our story to live on social media. So we posted on Instagram, and we wrote written stories, and we shared on Facebook and all these things. And so that we think that there's a lot of fluidity if you approach it that way, instead of just having a story strictly live through video or strictly live through photos. I think it creates interest, and it also sustains it for a longer period of time.
So how did you kind of like develop the drive to get to where you are? Because I think there's a lot of people that get involved in the media space, but they don't necessarily like have that inner thing that pushes them to get to the point where they're like, okay, I'm going to really try and understand how these things work together and how I can use this to grow different things and like push audiences in different directions and really understand like connectivity and flow and just like utilizing media in a way to kind of like get people to do what you want them to do. But I mean, like using that as a cause for good, like how did you, what's driving you to delve into that more? Because I think for us, we're both a little bit more on the younger side, at least in the media industry as a whole. So like, what started that journey, and what kind of keeps you trying to play with how all of that works together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I've always been fairly tapped into new technologies, especially internet-based technologies and communication. And I was always kind of like against it, and seeing kind of this selfie generation emerge in front of me has kind of made me like want to continue to produce content on these platforms and get into this sort of media business, and change the way that people today are using it. I think people are very kind of self-absorbed in media today, and a lot of the things that they post or a lot of the things that they create come back to their own self-image, which is kind of a constant conflict within myself. For social media, for example, I know that I have to create this sort of brand image, but I also want to be true to myself and true to my friends and family who know me well. So I think it has a little bit to do with kind of be if I can change the course of the way that media is created or looked upon, then I think that'd be great. And I've always had like ideas, and a lot of passion for social causes and all that kind of stuff. And I think if you use it correctly, media, especially social media, can play a huge role in that kind of stuff. I don't know if there's necessarily one sole cause for me jumping into this. It's kind of weird. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would you be in the media business? I was always interested in film. But I think that media and business now are so intertwined that might be a huge driving force behind, why I'm in it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the reasons, at least for myself, that I've kind of gotten more into that side of things is like I worked at an advertising agency for a while and kind of got to experience firsthand like what comes with that cubicle life and doing work for bigger brands, and things kind of start to get muddled down, and you really start to, if you're an analytical person, you start to really think about why you're doing something and what kind of good that's doing for the world. And for me, it kind of got into the same thing you were talking about, which is there's a lot of kind of entitlement going on, and there's just so many people that are misusing media and social media and all of this stuff to create content that's not going to stay around. And I always try and look at it as, um, if all this stuff that we're creating were to be left for however many thousands of years and some alien race ended up coming upon all the crap that we made, would they even care about what was going on? Would they, play this stuff back and what the hell is this person posting? It's just like all of the same shit. Why does this matter?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And like, my personal approach to content creation is authenticity. I'm driven by raw emotion and real stories. I think those are the ones that prove to be more timeless than something that's super fabricated,
Definitely. And it's funny, I was just like, right before we got on here, I go on LinkedIn quite a bit just to kind of stay up with what other people are doing in the industry and what else is happening, and just kind of being able to understand trends a little bit more. And
Yeah,
man, dude, there's so much just total shit out there. People are trying to create that realness in a way that is super fake, and you can, like, without being able to really touch on why it's fake, you can just feel it right off the bat, and you're like,
yeah,
this is just really gross.
right. And there might not necessarily be something that you can pinpoint. It's like, like you said, it's a feeling that you get. And I mean, I don't understand necessarily why people think that they need to try and portray these real stories in a fake manner. I think it just comes down to laziness, or money, I guess. If they have a lot of money, then they might add a lot to the production value, and in turn that kind of takes away some of that realness. But I think that gritty, raw authenticity is what not only attracts people, but is going to like keep their interest and have them share your content, and then just benefit everybody at the same time.
I think that's also one reason why I got attracted to the outdoor industry more, was seeing more of that content as I started to get into these types of activities more, was really being exposed to like the core of that emotion and how real it was and how people were trying to share that with other people. I had never really come across that in any other industry before, especially being a little bit more involved in the business world. It's super easy to go down that rabbit hole and becomes really focused on money and like the next goal that you're trying to meet. And I think, like I was saying earlier, if you're an analytical person, you get to this point where you're realizing, oh, there's not really an end to this. It just keeps going. You're just trying to hit the next thing over and over and over. And so I think that's kind of where a lot of people end up coming to that realization that, oh, there's something else out there that I might be able to touch on, or something that I'm not fully understanding outside of this like world. Because to me, it's like a video game almost. You start to understand kind of the rules and how you're playing and how to win at certain things, and then
Right.
after a while that almost becomes really boring.
No, totally. And I think, everyone talks about that 10,000 hour rule where where after 10,000 hours, you completely hone your skill. But one thing that I found super interesting when I was interning at Camp 4 is I mentioned that, to Renan and to Anson Fogel and to Tim Kemple, and they don't believe in that at all. I think it's a bunch of bullshit, because especially in media creation, it's an art that is continually transforming and thriving because of new technologies, because of social changes, cultural changes. So it's not something that you can just necessarily like become an expert at and then you're good forever. Because if you approach it that way, that stuff's going to phase out and whatever's new is going to come up. So they are always continually collaborating with young people, old people, people from completely different skill sets, people from different backgrounds, and to kind of touch on that outdoor aspect that you were talking about. I think in terms of authenticity, the outdoor audiences might be one of the most brutal bullshit sniffing audiences out there, because people live it. Like if Nike, for example, comes out with a commercial that's fabricated, I mean, people see that as more entertainment, instead of inspiration to go out and try and be a professional basketball player, or professional football player, where a lot of this outdoor content is to inspire people to continue to get outdoors or push themselves. So a great example, I think there's a lot of backlash for Coors Light. They had some campaign where it showed like 3 or 4 young kids that like ducked a rope into that backcountry with no backcountry gear on. And they had no backcountry gear. And I remember specifically seeing Jim Harris, Perpetual Weekend, on Instagram. He had posted something talking about how that is just so, like, from Coors Light's perspective, it's just like something that's not responsible. You know, showing this image of 3 people going in the backcountry with no backcountry gear on could potentially, and it probably wouldn't, but it could potentially put people in danger for seeing that. And the fact that all these outdoor people were just up in arms about it just speaks to that, you know, the outdoor industry being very authenticity based.
Yeah, and I think it also touches on the fact that in the outdoor industry, and I mean this isn't saying that it's the industry as a whole, because you have your shitheads like you would anywhere else.
Yeah, like anywhere.
Yeah, there's like this sense of the not necessarily the older generation, but the people that have been around more and really been through the ups and downs, trying to kind of distill these nuggets of information to the people that are coming in so that they really understand what they're getting themselves into, both in terms of, you know, safety, sustainability, just in general being a better human, and not approaching the outside world or these wild places in the same way that you would approach a city. You know, you can't just go in and expect to have this wonderful mind-opening experience. You have to be conscious of all of these other things that are at play, because you're going into a scenario that's very real, and shit can turn at the snap of a finger. And I think one weird thing about like the next generation that's coming up, and kind of the explosion of like the millennials into the outdoor industry, is like they don't have that knowledge base. And so it's really doing things like this podcast, trying to really distill that information in a way where they're not seeing it as being preachy, because it's like you really can't look at all this stuff related to mountains and just say, oh, I'm going to go try and hike this mountain, because then you get out there, something happens in a split second and everything changes. And I think what people don't realize, if they haven't been in one of those situations, is how quickly things can change, and how much you need to think about that beforehand going into those, so that you can really mitigate the risk.
And there's a sense of responsibility when you're outdoors. You know, I think a lot of especially the old people, they had those skills because you know, back in the day there weren't cell phones where you can call for help. If you were out there and you were in trouble, you were on your own. And I think today a lot of younger kids, I mean, especially in our generation and even younger, they're seeing all these cool photos of like the backcountry and the amazing places that your 2 feet can take you. And they think that it's just so easy. Like it's just a short jaunt from your car, and they don't go with the proper essentials or or knowledge base or anything. And, you know, it could get them in a lot of trouble.
For sure. How do you end up kind of going about taking all of the gear that you're working with out there? And is that like, what else do you have to think about when you're going to bring all of this massive amount of stuff out into the backcountry, especially if you're, you know, out skiing or something and there's, you know, avalanche potential? And the one reason I ask that is because I'm going to be helping you lug a bunch of this shit in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, luckily we won't be skiing, so it won't necessarily be as brutal. But no, I think having a couple extra hands is gonna do help a lot. But obviously, it's just being a pack rat and carrying, you know, more weight than you would if you were just gonna go camping. Because our plan is to go out and camp, but we're also going to bring, you know, 2 nice cameras, a red camera, a Sony FS7, batteries, potentially a drone. So I think it all just comes back to willpower. which I call it character building because because at some point in the future I'm gonna look back and be like, holy shit, that sucked, but
Mm-hmm.
that primed me for where I'm at now.
And that's totally going to be us potentially hiking Timp again
Yeah.
in the next week. And like, God, dude, I enjoyed that so much, but just thinking about that first half of portion of that hike is just,
Yeah.
I just don't even want to think about
And
it.
with 40 pounds on our back, that might be a little brutal.
Yeah, no kidding. So you touched on it a little bit with the 10,000 hour rule and like not necessarily taking as long to get to where you want them to be as an artist or as a professional in the world today. And I think you're kind of proof of that because you made the switch from kind of this different life into the media side of things very quickly, and you picked up on it super, super fast. Because for me, I had been doing, and I mean, I'm not sure if this is different for you, but
Yeah.
I've been doing kind of like artistic endeavors since I was very little, and I didn't necessarily know where I wanted to go with it, but that's always kind of been like a constant in my life. Like how do you see your journey in like going from what you were kind of focused on before to the media side of things, and like how many like roadblocks, I guess, came up along the way for you to kind of get over?
Yeah, I think like I don't think I'm even close to have made it yet. I would say that my skill set, especially, is very, very primitive compared to where I'd like it to be. But I think the main roadblocks for myself were obviously learning technical skills. Those are things that just take time. But beyond that, like to actually establish myself and create connections in the network, it was all on my own. Because I did transfer to Washington State late in my college career and change majors, I didn't have that time to be able to build super well. I wasn't able to get well connected within, my particular college, but in the industry as well. So, and my parents, as much as they would have loved to help, they have no connections in the industry. So I think the main hurdle was just building that early network that has helped me for the present. But for example, I had to get an internship to finalize my college credits and major, and I had emailed 30 companies and only heard back from 3, and luckily Camp4 was my number one my number one choice, and I heard back from them and I was stoked about it. But I think also another hurdle was just trying to figure out exactly what route within the creative industry I wanted to go. I'd always thought advertising would be a cool thing to do, just because I like the conceptual and strategy aspect of it. And I love graphic design. I have a very good eye for it, but technical wise, I'm just not there. It takes a lot of time. Illustrator is just can be your best friend, but it can also be your worst enemy. And I think film was always one of those things that came fairly natural to me. I'd always, wanted to get into film. My parents got me a camera when I was, in middle school or something, and I never hardly used it. I just didn't know how to use it. And at that time, I wasn't very good at using Google and trying to figure it out on my own. But yeah, I think some of the main issues were just figuring exactly what I wanted to do, and I found that out in film. But I also am doing more of the strategy and content, conceptual stuff, and I think just the networking aspect of it. But I have realized, especially in the outdoor industry, once you do build that simple network, it's much easier to meet other people. It seems very inclusive, and I'm sure you felt that yourself too.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally feel you on the technical side of stuff. When I was first learning how to use the Adobe Creative Suite, I would have literally full night's dreams from the time my head hit the pillow to the time I woke up of like being in this workflow and trying to get a project done in Photoshop, and just like being crazy frustrated that I couldn't get it to work how I wanted it to. And then I would wake up and immediately be pissed off because I was like, shit, that was a dream. And now I have to go back and literally do that in real life.
Yeah.
and work through it again. But yeah, on the other side of things, the connection side, for me, I had always kind of seen or looked up to a lot of these artists in the design world, um, and really just strive to make the best work that I could. And I think you always inevitably get to these plateaus when you're doing any sort of work where the amount of time that you're putting into it isn't necessarily giving you a feedback of more progression, and you are putting in more and more and more and more hours, and it's you're not progressing nearly as fast as you would, and if anything, it's kind of tapering off and getting even worse. But
Yeah.
When I hit that point, I kind of realized that I wasn't going to ever stop doing that, but that I needed to also start focusing on something else. And for me, I realized, like you were saying, is I needed to really make more connections. And I think that's when things really started to change for me, because I had this nice base built of the technical skills, the ability to think creatively and strategically on the marketing side of stuff. And then it was like, okay, how do I really make that work now? And the answer to me was networking. And so for anyone out there listening, for me, LinkedIn has been massive, because in today's day and age, you can really get into these tools that remove barriers. And LinkedIn is one of those things, because you no longer have to go to a gatekeeper at a company to hit the people that you're trying to get to. You can literally just send them a message, and if they're a cool person, they're going to get back to you, and they're going to help you if you're not a total dickhead. So I think it's cool, because you can come to these people that are in very high positions at companies that you can look up to, and you can get information directly from the source, and even build more of a connection with those people long term.
Yeah. Well, and what I've realized too is that people are very willing to help out. More than likely, the successful people had some sort of mentor or somebody who helped them out connection wise in the past. And I think a lot of people are scared to reach out to these people who we almost idolize in the industry. But when it comes down to it, they don't want to be treated like they're just some above and beyond God.
Yeah.
They enjoy people reaching out to them and asking questions. And I think, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, that is like a huge thing that I personally am going to continue to try and do. Is if somebody from my college reaches out to me, or somebody who I've never met, or a friend of a friend is just asking questions, I want to make it very, very clear that I'm here to help. It gets back to that whole give more than you can take. If you give more than you can take, you're not only going to be fulfilled for it, but that's just going to continue to reach corners that you might not have ever reached without somebody approaching you.
I agree. I think the other thing that you kind of get into after you make that decision to help other people kind of like come up in the way that you did, is you really have to start not necessarily looking at people's accomplishments, but like really getting a feel for if they're true to what they're doing and what they're saying to you, because there's a lot of people that will say things to try and get into a position quickly, or kind of use you as a resource and then just move on. But I think the other thing that I've noticed is there's not very many people that have the drive to reach out and ask the right questions. There are a lot of people that will reach out and ask questions that are just not very in depth. Like it's like super simple, stupid things. Like they'll reach out to me on Instagram and be like, "Hey, how do I make my page as popular as possible?" Something really stupid like that. And it's like, I'll try and be very polite and just be like, "So what is your goal with trying to grow your page that quickly, that fast? What do you like?" I had somebody message me on one of the other like quote accounts that I run, which I don't talk about very much, because it's more of just like a helping thing for me and less of a look what I'm doing. But I had someone message me on one of those and say that exact same thing. And I was like, "What is your goal here? What are you trying to do?" And they're like, "I'm just trying to grow it as fast as possible." And it's like, okay, but for what reason? Like, there's no depth to what they're asking. And I think I haven't had very many people at least reach out to me, and maybe that's because I'm not necessarily I don't have the name behind me that other people do, but I don't have very many people reach out being very sincere about trying to do what they're doing, and like getting more of a guidance for that.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people when they do reach out to somebody, maybe they reach out because of the name as opposed to like what they want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, I mean, some of the questions are just very, very dry and not really like have any substance. And I mean, the co-founder of the Locals Project, Scotty Proctor, you know, he was one of those guys where during college, you know, he was reaching out to every designer, like every creative entrepreneur, and just like trying to pick their brain, and it build more of like a personal relationship as opposed to like some sort of hierarchical relationship.
Mm-hmm. That kid's got an insane amount of drive too that I don't think I've seen in like
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
Like when we were doing that first Timpanogos hike, and we got out of the car, he just like took off, beelined it for the trail, and was like running right off the bat. I was like, dude, I'm not even awake yet. Like I can't even jog, let alone like he was just getting ready to blast the mountain right off the bat.
Yeah, and that's one thing that like we had a meeting for the Locals Project the other week, and we were kind of going around the table talking about our strengths and weaknesses. And one of his strengths, you know, is that when he wants to accomplish something or has a goal, he goes 110% at it.
Yeah.
And that's a nice thing to have, because I'm more of like a logical person who, you know, if I see any sort of roadblock in the future, I take that into account, where he's like, fuck it, we're going to do this, we're going to accomplish it, and like, so it's nice to have that sort of balance between like almost like blind optimism and drive, and then the more logical side in myself, where like if I am like, oh man, I don't know if we should do it because of this or this, he's like, dude, we're doing it and we're gonna go. Yeah. So it's nice to have him to kind of feed off of, for sure.
I think you definitely need both though, because there's times where if you're just, and I mean, I've done it in my own life where I have been like, this needs to get done. I'm just putting my head down and just ramming through it. And then you like, when you get to the point where you pick your head back up, you're like, oh shit, I don't know if this is like where I wanted to go. I mean, you could relate that to a trail or any, like what happened to you guys when you were trying to go up the mountain, like, oh, the trail is actually to the left. We're trying to get up quick. So we're just going to go to the right and we're just going to blast it. And then you end up getting stuck on this overhanging rocky mess of bullshit.
Yeah. I don't want to think of that. Think about that. Hopefully when we go up there in a couple of weeks, we won't get into that same problem.
Yeah.
But no, I think yeah, it's always nice to have like a well-rounded view of a goal, for example, where you understand that there will be roadblocks. And I think personally, I like to, I don't know where this came from, but I like to make sure that I make logical decisions as opposed to based off of emotion. Because when you do make emotional decisions, whether it's a positive one or a negative one, I think you're blind to potential hazards. And so conversely, I think that like you should take hazards into account and weigh them and see if it's even worth it, you know. And if it is, then let's do it. But if it's not, then I don't think, you know, the amount of money that you can make in or like the connections or the platforms that are going to help push content or something. I don't think that those things should necessarily outweigh any potential hazards that could fault you in the future.
That seems like a double-sided coin though at the same time, because I definitely agree with you in that a lot of decisions that you have to make definitely have to be based on logic instead of emotion. But I also think being able to get enough experiences under your belt in life where you can understand where emotion plays a role so that you know when to bring that in. Because there's definitely times where the logic, I think the best example of this would be in business, where someone gets into a marketing role and it's like, we need to measure, this needs to happen, and then it's like, okay, well, we're trying to create content now that is more real and based in emotion, and you can't create metrics to determine whether or not that's a success
Yeah.
just based on logic. You have to be able to pull in the emotional side of things and understand, like, is this resonating with me? Is this resonating with other people? How does that play into the logic side of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because especially content creation is more of an emotional thing. And a lot of the big agencies and big production houses are approaching it through a logical level. Like, okay, we're touching this target market. They like these activities, blah blah blah, and it's almost like a formula for them. But I think what appeals to me the most for what the Locals Project is starting to do is that, and where we want to be is that we want companies to approach us based off of our approach to content creation, which is raw, honest, and authentic. Obviously, with a project that we're doing now, we understand who our target market is. We understand what we want to accomplish as like key performance indicators and all that kind of stuff. But we've been given looser reins to be able to, first of all, find who our characters are and tell their stories in a creative way that's going to help build a larger brand image. But I think as far as business goes, it's kind of funny because I look at a lot of the decisions that I want to make as being logical decisions. But then you hear some of these successful entrepreneurs that are like, sometimes you just got to fucking do it. You just got to you just got to go for it 100%. And if you fail, then you fail. But at least you know that you gave it 100%. But that's not necessarily how I think, although I do think that failure is a huge asset for anybody, whether it's like life experiences, business ventures. I think failure not only teaches you a lot about yourself and how you react in certain situations, but it gives you that knowledge base and sets a precedent for the future in case you ever come across anything that's similar.
Yeah, and to go back to the first part of what you were talking about, I think there's a lot of blurred lines going on now. What used to happen is people very much identified with like, this is the one way that I am, and I'm not this person or this person. And what's happening now is with all of these new brands coming out and all of this new content and all of this shifting things going on in the technology space, is like people are starting to identify more with bits and pieces of other things that they see, and their lives are becoming this mold of all of these other things. So they can consume content that might not necessarily relate to them 100%, but through the empathy side of things, they can understand like, oh, I really relate to that one aspect of this person's life. And so it's really cool that you guys are really starting to get the opportunity to create content like that and have a little bit more free reign, because I think there's a lot of people that haven't even tuned into that side of things yet, or that shift in how people are consuming content and how their lives are shifting. And I also think that definitely lends more to the fear side of things, and like allowing yourself to make mistakes and be human, in what you were talking about. And I think I definitely lived my life in a similar way, where it's like, I will follow something to the end of the path completely, and then do a little bit of bushwhacking to make sure that is definitely the end. And when I realize that, yeah, oh, that's it, then I'll be like, all right, done, turn around, go back down a different path. Because then, in the future, it lends itself to living with less regret, because you know that you followed that to the end, and then even a little bit further to make sure that it was the end.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the bushwhacking. I think that really just stood out to me, because I'm reading a book right now called Think and Grow Rich. This book is more about like, your mentality and stuff to allow that to make you money. But I'm applying it to more other facets of my life. But there's a really good example of this guy who struck gold, made a bunch of money, bought all this equipment. And then one day he's like, yeah, I'm going to be able to do this for years and mine all this gold. And then he hit a fault line. Well, he didn't know it was a fault line. He just thought it was the end of the treasure. And so he sold his equipment for salvage prices to this other guy who had somebody that's knowledgeable about the earth and its land and stuff come out. And the guy was like, no, man, this is just a fault line. And so as opposed to that bushwhacking that you were talking about, is continuing to go and make sure that it's the end of the road, he just instantly sold off his equipment. Another guy came in and just mined the shit out of it for years to come. But that original guy, he ended up being another successful businessman. But he used that one experience as that precedent where I'm going to continue to work as hard as I can, even if it seems like it's the end of the road, to make sure that it's either at the end of the road or I can continue to go further.
For sure. Bringing that back into relation to what you had talked about a while ago with your own life, how purposeful were you in deciding some of the choices that you've made? Because I think there's like this weird intermingling of like being very purposeful in the way that you are laying out your decisions and like where you want to go. But then after that happens, there's a lot of these super random occurrences that happen along the way to kind of like help nudge you down that line. What portion of the things that have happened in your life in regards to the path that you're on happened because you kind of laid them out and it was a very purposeful decision?
Oh yeah. I don't think a lot of it was based off of, laying out some sort of roadmap. As my parents can tell you, I'm not a very good decision maker. Like when it comes to like shopping, for example, like I went with my mom to Nordstrom's last week for my birthday, and we were just walking around for like an hour, and she's like, yeah, do you want that? And I'm like, go and try it on, and walk out and show it to her, and she's like, oh, it looks good. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I ended up only getting like 2 pieces of clothing, but I think I'm a huge believer in just like, first of all, a positive mindset and where that can take you, coupled with ambition. And I think a lot of the things that have happened in my life have just happened. It's not because I had that goal in mind. I played college baseball, and I never thought that I would win a national championship. And I was lucky enough to transfer to a smaller school in Alabama, and win a national championship the first year. And, I never would have ever guessed that I met my buddy Scotty, who is now my business partner and co-founder of the Locals Project. Mm-hmm. But he happened to be the next door neighbor of my uncle, who had always, while growing up, said, yo, you need to meet my neighbor, Scotty. You guys are so much alike. And we never met. And then we just so happened to be in Whistler at the same time, and he connected us. And we instantly talked about what he did in school as a graphic designer and kind of the creative industry. And I was never exposed to anything like that. So it really like struck me at that moment. I was like, wow, this is something that I'd love to pursue myself. And just that conversation alone, I think, shaped my path to where I'm at now. And I never would have expected that I'd get an internship at Camp4. And it just so happened that, I had to do an application test, and I spent like 70 hours on it or something to create like the best product that I could and send it off. And I didn't even hear back from them for a month. And I was kind of that squeaky wheel who kept emailing them because they're always, somewhere around the world working. And that's internship is the last thing they're thinking about. Mm-hmm. And then I emailed Anson, who's one of the partners there. And he immediately emailed back saying, hey, can you send me the link to that video? Sent it to him. 10 minutes later, he said, I got the internship. And he knew. Yeah. And I never would have thought that I would have ever met you. And then we go to a music festival, get out and start drinking beers. And then you and Kevin and his girlfriend pull up, and we start talking. And like, I think a lot of, I wouldn't even consider myself successful yet. Like I think I'm on the path towards it, but I think a lot of the things that have happened have been because of just faith in my own abilities, confidence, in a positive mindset. I think positive thinking brings positive results.
And I think success isn't necessarily like this end goal. I think success is being, and it sounds so cheesy, but it's so true, is like being content and happy with the journey, and like understanding that there are ups and downs, and there will continue to be ups and downs, and that you're not ever going to like get through that. Because I think a lot of people see success as this thing at the end of the road that you reach where everything makes sense and everything's fine and there's no hardship anymore and everything's perfect. And I don't think that's ever really a thing. And
but, I think people judge success based off of monetary, based off of money, and I it's really weird, but my mom will always bring up this story, and I don't know where it came from. I guess I was hyper aware when I was younger, you know, of just like my surroundings and stuff. But she's like, I specifically remember the day that you came up to me when you were like 11 or 12 and said, I never want to be unhappy with my job. I never want to do anything that I don't want to do. And I've always held true to that. And I think a lot of people get stuck in a trap of like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm settled. I can make a lot of money. You know, this is how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to be miserable 5 days a week, live for the weekend, and then go back on Monday hating my life.
Yeah.
And it's sad that people have gotten into that mentality.
And that's a really awesome segue into another question that I wanted to ask, which was how did that progression end up for you of going from the baseball side of things into the media, and like what did that feel like? Because essentially to me, I think there's a lot of instances where that happens in other people's lives and happened in mine too, where you hit a point where you're really starting to build this new self.
Yeah.
And it's like the old you kind of like dies off, and it's a very scary thing that I think not a lot of people go through, because they hit the point where they're confronting that and the possibility of doing that, and
Yeah.
it's so scary to think that you're going to be somebody else all of a sudden, or at least be on this slow path towards someone else that they end up turning around.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. It was definitely hard, and it still is. It still is sometimes, you know, hard. It's only been 3 years since I stopped playing, and I played every year until I was 5 years old. You know, and it's kind of this identity thing where it's like I've always looked at myself as a baseball player. Every single one of my goals was to make the major leagues. You know, I did everything around my life was surrounded by that end goal. And so when you finally make the decision to hang up the cleats and go a different path, for me, it was like, all right, like, who am I now? I'm not a baseball player. I'm literally a college student. And I always had love for media and the outdoors and all these things that I'm kind of surrounded by now. But I never necessarily identified with those things. Like, I would go on ski trips and I would go hiking and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't like necessarily look at myself as like this outdoors person. And I don't think that I necessarily do now, but it's like definitely a huge part of my life. And I'm trying, and one thing I'm working on is to not necessarily like pigeonhole myself into like one identity or the next identity. Like, I just want to be myself. And if I love sports, but I also love to go out on backpacking trips or the hikes, so be it. There's not a lot of people that are outdoors people, but also sports people, or vice versa. And I understand that, but what I'm really trying to do is just like, you know, keep myself open to all these experiences, and all these different parts of my life that I truly enjoy. You know, like, I used to be a musician. I played the saxophone. And to be honest, once I went into high school, I was like, why would I do that? Like, I'm a baseball player. I'm not like some nerdy like band kid, you know? And now that I look back at it, I wish I would have continued to play it. Because it's one of those things that I just enjoyed. I loved, I had a good ear for. And so, you know, looking back at that now, I'm like, if I love something, I don't care what people think about me for that love or enjoyment that I get out of it. But it was definitely a hard transition for sure.
And I think that's a rare thing to be able to have, and something that only comes with drastic change. We were talking about a little bit on that hike that we did, trying to get to Mount Olympus, which we need to do again, by the way, because the slabs look sick and we should have went that way in the first place. But off topic. I think there's this sense of like really understanding who you are to your core when a change like that happens in your life that you don't get unless you take that step. And I think what happens is you kind of like step into the void and understand that you as a person are not going to be affected by all of this external change that happens around you. And it kind of like grounds you in yourself, because then you're able to say, okay, I can really do anything that I want to do. And if it doesn't work out, to my core, I'm not changed as a person.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that's kind of sad with, you know, some ex-teammates or people that I've seen along the way who were like me, who like had these end goals of being in the major leagues, for example. and their whole life was revolved around baseball. And now I see them and they're lost. I was lucky enough to have a supportive family who was like, whatever you want to do, go for it. And I was lucky enough to have that in my life where once I did make that change, I wasn't scared to make the change or anything like that. Where I see people who stop playing and they're just like not working the best jobs, that they might not have even graduated, and they just lost all their ambition and a complete identity crisis far beyond what I ever experienced. But it's just kind of a sad thing to see.
What do you think is the changing, the shift in mindset, or like the push that gets people beyond that that change in their life? Because I think, and it seems like it's a little bit easier for more creative minded people because they are already grasping at like this thing that's not really there, and like playing with ideas and trying to understand life and concepts and all this stuff more. So they're more easily adaptable to something that comes up like that, and able to really feel out the right direction past it.
Yeah.
But like, so for someone that isn't able to understand that they need to shift their life a little bit, what do you think ends up being the thing that pushes it over for them, that really forces them into action, versus someone that just hits the wall and stays there and stays, sad or messed up because of it?
I think it's just the idea of happiness. I think when it comes down to it, life should be about love and happiness, whether that's you loving and being happy with yourself, or projecting that onto other people. But I think it's like a crossroads that you get to where it's like, I'm not necessarily happy doing this. Like, I haven't found what I want to do. So it becomes more of a soul searching thing. But no, I have a great example. I mean, an ex-teammate, I had, been following him on Facebook and stuff. And a lot of the posts are just so negative, so negative, so negative. And then recently, about a couple weeks ago, he was like, time for some life changes. Time to make some goals and focus on like the future and stuff. And I think he must have came to that point, that crossroads where he understood that he was unhappy, but it's like this weird hole that you get into. Cause I mean, I've had parts of my life where I've been, borderline depressed or unhappy, and people begin to get used to that and they think that they'll never get out of it and it's going to last forever. But then there's that kind of light, that the flip that gets switched, where it's like, no, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Like, I remember when I was happy and how amazing that was. And so then you take action to be able to change that. But I think, yeah, as far as that crossroads goes to, I think it all comes down to happiness for sure.
So that kind of brings me to the next question, which is, how do you know, what is the feeling that you get, like in your case, when you ended up getting more into the media side of things? How did you know that was the next right path? Because it's easy for someone to say, okay, I'm sick of this shit, I'm done with whatever I'm doing here, it doesn't make me happy. But then I think the other thing that comes into play is, now what? So how do you how do you know that you're onto the right thing, I guess? Or maybe not necessarily the right thing, but something that feels better than something else?
I think it was just fulfillment, because I even before I made that switch to sort of the media stuff, I was tinkering with different parts of business, whether it was economics or marketing, or whatever, and none of those things truly made me engaged. And I think it comes back to, like, I have ADD, and growing up through high school and middle school and elementary school, if I wasn't interested in the subject, I did not give one shit about it, and that's a tough thing for teachers to understand too, is like, if this kid, when he's and when I am interested in something, I give my all to it. Mm-hmm. So I guess I never felt that I was completely giving my all to a certain subject until I had that conversation with Scotty, and I started doing some research, and I researched this big designer at Nike, and I see this, like, this video about I think it's some top secret Nike room where like designers and engineers and all these like creative minds come together and they brainstorm for shoes. And I was like, wow, that is like amazing, because they're not only being creative, but they're being innovative, and they're really changing the landscape for this example for shoes. So I think as far as like finding that passion, I think it's always there. And I've read some borderline bullshit articles about like, don't follow your passion and like, don't do that kind of stuff. But I don't think you necessarily have to follow exactly what you're passionate about. Like, I'm passionate about sports and outdoors. I don't necessarily have to go and be a professional skier, but I think to me, the fulfillment that I get out of what I do is that I'm surrounded by my passions. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's just realizing what are some of the other passions in your life and how can you be surrounded by that every day? Because if you can do that, then you'll be totally fulfilled, and you'll be able to be like, oh, like on a Sunday night, you're like not dreading that you have to go to work in the morning. You're like, oh wow, I can't wait to go to work.
Yeah, and the other portion of that, I think, is understanding that there's always going to be some level of like, I don't want to do this, regardless of how pumped you are about it, because it comes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which was there's not ever like this perfect level of success. There's not ever this perfect thing that you're going to reach that you'll be totally comfortable with. There's always going to be some stupid little thing that your animal brain is stuck on, like, oh, I hate this thing. Why are you doing this? And it's like trying to better understand or be, I guess, appreciation for the moment, and like the work that you've put in kind of helps you get through that, because you understand that it is a process and you're not ever really going to get through it. But I think the other thing of that is, and what I've tried to do with my life is develop multiple things that I'm very passionate about, because at least for me, I get very burned out on doing one thing, because I'm a very like goal driven person, and I'm similar to you in that if I have something that I want to do, I'm going to do it full out. I might not be as intense about it as Scott is, but
we got to get him on the show.
Yeah, for sure. But I'll go for it. And I think having other things that you can kind of turn to when something starts to get a little bit mundane or hard or
I mean, it's a good point that you bring up, that even if you are surrounded by the thing that you love doing, there are those days or those moments where you're like, this sucks, and that comes with anything in life. If you're driving down the car and it's a beautiful day and you're in a great mood and somebody cuts you off, you're instantly going to be like, what the hell, man? Like, fuck you. But I think it's all in your mindset on how you approach those things. Because I think there's two types of people given those types of situations. They either dwell on them and they let that continue to affect them throughout the day, the week, the month, the year, their life. Or it's the people that, take those things with a grain of salt, understand that it happens. It's not necessarily like the worst thing that can ever happen, and then move on. And I think I kind of relate that to baseball. I think a lot of my life lessons come from playing the sport and just picking people's brains and learning the mental side of it, since it's such a mental game. But it's a game of failure. If you fail 7 out of 10 times hitting, you're going to be an all-star. And what else in your life do you fail? Can you be considered like successful if you fail 7 out of 10 times? Any other job you're gonna get fired, right? So it really taught me to get over failure quickly. A lot of people will strike out, for example, and they'll dwell on that in the field, and then they'll get a ball hit to them and they'll make an error. And then it's like these compound mistakes, as opposed to like, okay, it's in the past, it happened. You can't control the uncontrollable, on to the next one. And it also taught me that, like, back to that, you can't control the uncontrollable notion is like, if an umpire makes a bad call and calls a strike on something that was clearly a ball, that's something that is out of your reach, out of your control, and it happened. So there's no reason to focus on it. You can only control your effort and your attitude. And I apply that to every part of my life. Like, if you have a positive attitude and you're ambitious and you give 110% effort, you have to succeed.
The thing that I have been struggling with more recently and trying to understand a little bit more, both based on logic and emotion, is like, how do you know um, when something is telling you to stop versus just being a roadblock that you need to accept and then get through? Like, how many times does something need to, I don't want to use the word like go wrong, but like how many times do you
How
need
many
to hit a,
hiccups do there need to be, or like,
yeah, so like at what point does the hiccup become the lesson of you need to move on from this now versus this is just another hiccup that you need to keep going through?
yeah, I don't think I have the answer for that. You know, like, I think The Art of War is just a great book to kind of like understand resistance. And I think every successful person in their life feels some sort of resistance towards that road, on that road, you know?
Hmm.
And I don't know. I think it's just intuition. I think our subconscious really truly knows, and that gets to a whole nother conversation about, you know, the control that your subconscious has over your life. But I think you just inherently know, and maybe sometimes people will bypass that feeling, and then they get themselves into trouble. But I think deep down inside, you know that something's not the right path to
Hmm.
go towards.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is definitely the answer. But I think the thing that pushes people away, and myself included, is like you start to bring in more rational decision making or analytical decision making into something that is feeling based, and that's where shit goes wrong. It's like you know deep down that this needs to happen a certain way or that you need to make a certain decision, and when you start thinking about it over and over and over again and trying to like understand these aspects of the decision that don't need to be brought in is when you start to muddle things down and you really get crippled, and you can't like really see the way out after that.
Yeah, and I think Scotty's a better example than myself in this. But like, he, you know, like, even if he does consider some potential hiccups or whatever, he just does it. And like, a
Hmm.
good example, for myself is that, you know, we would write up these draft emails to pitch projects to companies, or talk, or in the negotiation process with a project, and it's so impossible to fucking get your finger to go and press that enter button or like click send. You know, like, I don't know why it's so hard. Like, but it just gets to a point where you're like, fuck it, you just do it, you know?
Hmm.
You proofread it 10 times. You're like, am I saying the right thing? Does my tone sound right? Does this sound like I'm demanding anything? And all these things. And then it just gets to a point where you just need to say, fuck it, like, just go. And I mean, I think that can be applied to a larger scale. Obviously, you have to be smart about it. But no, I think a lot of people just get caught up on like what ifs, and what ifs are an uncontrollable. Um, what you can control is your effort and your attitude, and the way that people receive it is beyond you. So I think for me, it's just like looking past anything that could potentially happen, because it's not set in stone that it will happen. So there's no reason to dwell on it.
I think I've learned that lesson in my own life and used it in just about every decision making process that I've had. And I think that's one reason, or one thing that comes out of like the marketing background that I have is like you can't get analysis paralysis and allow yourself to. At a certain point, you just need to make a fucking decision
Yeah.
and move on from it and accept what accept the decision you made and deal with any potential outcome based on that and just use it as a learning experience. And I
Right.
think that um, for me, I'm not a very intense person. Like I'm pretty relaxed. I don't really show a lot of emotion. And I think that it was always hard for me to listen to these people that I respected or that were in the community talk about how um, they just went out and did things and that was it. And there was no other like thought process going on. It was just like, okay, this needs to happen, done. And for me, it was always hard because I was never really that type of person. And then finally, it started to click where it was like, you don't need to be that type A personality to just
No.
make a decision. You just need to like continually flex that muscle and understand that the more just like deliberate decisions that you make, like, okay, I'm just going to do this, the better off you're going to be, because it's either going to be the right decision or you're going to learn from it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, I consider myself to be kind of in the middle between being intense and relaxed and kind of, holding my tongue sometimes. But then again, I'm not necessarily like scared to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, from some of the things that I've learned from athletics, for example, is like some of the best players that I played with, they weren't the guys that were like looking in the mirror at their swing or like asking coaches about, oh, what's wrong with my swing? They just fucking attacked the day every day. They trusted their skills. They trusted how they got in that position in the first place. And they just do it. It's almost like dumbing things down to the point where like, you don't have to think about it. You just do it. And I think that's a good skill that everybody can learn. And I'm still not even there yet, but I think that sort of thinking can greatly like help you out.
Yeah, I think that's one reason why I've latched onto mountain biking more in like the last couple of weeks, is because that, and along with outdoor sport climbing, is like those two things really force me into that flow state of not analyzing things so much and just going with what's happening. Because if I looked at what I was doing on a mountain bike from like a third person perspective, I'd be like, dude, what the hell are you doing? You are going to get so fucked up. And then when I'm in it doing it, it's just like, that's all there is. And I love it. And there's no thought process behind it. It's just like, yeah, you could. And there's been several times where it's like, yeah, I landed goofy. I'm about to smash into this rock.
Yeah.
And like, if the thought process goes through your head of, oh, I'm going to get super messed up here, you're probably going to get super messed up, versus if you're just like letting it go and going with what's happening and adapting and changing and moving, you're probably a lot less likely to hit that rock.
Yeah. And I think, and your brain, I think, is wired, to accept your last thought, as almost like a course of action. If you tell yourself, don't go off this jump sideways, or don't be in the air and like fucking get unbalanced or something, the last thing your mind remembers is be unbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just like counteracting, either negative thoughts or thoughts of fear with positive thoughts. And it comes back to even, it comes back to, like this book that I'm reading where, I can't think of the term right now, but you basically tell yourself everything positive, what you want to happen, and it might not necessarily has happened yet. You want to be happy, you want to be confident, you want to do all these things. You tell yourself as if you are, your subconscious starts believing it, and then you subconsciously make actions to achieve that goal.
It's funny because we were just doing a bunch of focus groups, and the moderator that was running them, we were asking her a bunch of questions about how she kind of like leads the group through certain discussions that are going on. And she was saying that in the US, she has to start with the positive and lead with the negative if she's talking about anything, because in the US, people tend to latch onto the negative. So if she starts with the negative, it will literally influence their decision throughout the entire rest of the conversation. And I thought that was insane, because like for her, in her world of analytics, the rest of the world is the complete opposite. So it's weird to me that like here in the United States, people think that way. And it's like what you were just saying, target fixation. You kind of like, you look at the negative, and then your brain has a very, very hard time getting off of that thing. Do you have like any example, like real world examples of things that you've tried to do, either as it relates to the negative or positive of that kind of thing, where like you focused on it and it's ended up, shifting whatever's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just for the locals project, after our first kind of successful launch of content, we got to this crossroads where we were like, well, do we want to Well, actually, another good example, probably a better example would be for this project that we're doing. You know, there was a negotiation process where it was back and forth, and it was
Mhm.
like, oh, we got it, like high five, let's go grab beers, and then the next we get an email 5 hours later, oh, we didn't get it, and I think you know, we got to a point where we're like, you know what, we got this thing. Like, if we're going to continue to dwell on this negotiation process, which is kind of a business, you know, it's a business transaction when it comes down to it. Then if we're negative about it, then we probably won't get it, or we'll
Mhm.
send an email that has a negative tone, or we'll send off something. We'll have a conversation that will not progress the conversation, but completely hinder it. So we got to a point where we're just like we're going to get this thing, we're going to make it happen. I think we're in a great position, and just continue to think positive about it. And that allowed us to like step back and actually make sure that our emails were well thought out and had a good tone to them, and all these things that actually led to us getting the job. um, but yeah, like right now, it's hard for me to like kind of pinpoint any specific examples of that, but I just try and live by that every day. I mean, I've gotten in, whether it's because I'm living with people who are in a negative mindset or surrounded by people, I've gotten, I've been susceptible to that and fallen in that trap of like, oh, let's just dwell on things. Let's complain. Oh, things suck, you know, like, and then like I get to that point where I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I complaining about? Like I'm so very like fortunate in my life, and now like when I hear negative things, I try and just like combat them with positivity instantly, because those are things that get implanted in your mind, and then they like dive deep down into the subconscious and can change your conscious thinking. um yeah.
How does that relate to success for you then? Because I think there's a lot of times, and it's happened with me, and I've seen it in other people too, where
Yeah.
you are surrounded by not necessarily negative things, but like things aren't working out the way that you want them to, and all of a sudden something clicks, and you kind of like start taking these steps up toward where you want to be. Um, how do you deal with like the negative aspect of success? Like I think when things start to work for somebody,
Hmm.
your head immediately starts to go, oh, this is working now. How am I going to fuck this up? Like how could
Yeah.
this go wrong? Why is this actually working? Because you're so used to things not necessarily going the way that you want them to, that when they start doing so, your head kind of like flips around on itself and like tries to talk you out of it.
Yeah, I think it just comes like blind faith. Like I try not to ever think about the negative consequences that could happen. I think if you go in it with that positive mindset, I just, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just kind of ingrained in my personality somehow. I don't know if there's like any specific instance that kind of taught me that. Um, but I think as far as me getting past any negative thoughts or fears is just like faith in the path that I think is good, that I'm on. And I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a religious person, but I'm kind of spiritual, and that I think that everybody does have their destiny, and to completely like trust that path. Whether it's, well, and I think it also comes down to me having like kind of end goals on like where I'd like to be, things that I'd like to accomplish. I think goals are good to the fact that you don't necessarily have to achieve them, but to have them allows
Mhm.
you to at least have a path to follow. And then along the way, you might veer left or right or turn around or something. But if you don't have those end goals or anything like that, then you get hung up on those things that could like change your course or just halt you right there.
Agreed, agreed. And we actually only have a few minutes left, so we're gonna have to do this again because this was one of like the fastest podcasts I think I've ever done. Time just
Yeah,
flew by.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you want to just talk a little bit about the plans that you guys have with the Cuba project before we
yeah,
kind of wrap things up?
for sure. Yeah. So we are going to be going on a 35 to 40 day trip in Cuba starting in December. And we're going to be creating content for a larger social mission. It'll be a call of action. But I think what's very interesting is that a coastline of 3,500 miles and 11 million in a country with 11 million people, there's only 150 surfers and one woman surfer. And that's due to, the government doesn't necessarily, it looks at it as more of a recreation as opposed to a sport like baseball or soccer. So they don't back it. And there's actually been instances where surfers would swim around the blockades in the ocean to go surf and hit the brakes, and the government would think that they were trying to flee the country. And because of the lack of support, there's no economic support at all. There's no surf shops. They can't get new boards. They can't get any sort of like wax or resin or anything like that. So they rely heavily on donations from tourists. So what we're going out to do is we're gonna produce probably a 10 to 12 minute short documentary that is focused solely on the surfers and the state of surfing there. And we're going to show kind of these struggles in a very creative way, and we want to connect the surf culture, which is very like passionate and distinct. We want to connect that with the broader Cuban culture so that we can create kind of a bridge between the two, so that hopefully our content can open some eyes within the Cuban government, or at least inspire change. And so this content that we produce, it'll be video, it'll be photo, it'll be written content, it'll be shorter stories of people that we meet along the way. That's going to be a call to action to our Surf Cuba campaign, which we plan on producing, Surf Cuba shirts, stickers, hats, water bottles if we get the opportunity, and selling those in proceeds of those will go towards the purchase of new gear. So what we hope to do is legitimize the sport in the country, so that, we want the global surf community to rally around them, and we want them to be like the ones that kind of drive this campaign and this movement, so that Cuba can be looked at as, a surfing country. We don't necessarily want to exploit the country at all by any means. That's that kind of the number one thing that we want to avoid. And we don't want to encourage people to travel to Cuba per se. But we want our effect to be completely for the Cuban people and to get more people out on surfboards.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really drive home the point that the goal isn't to explode this thing. It's like to really like build the core of what that sport is in Cuba, so that these people can continue doing what they want to do. Like, not like if you're bringing in more higher level sponsors, you're doing it in a way that respects what tradition is there already, and you're not like blowing it out to the point where it's having the opposite effect.
Well, we know that it's going to get westernized and exploited the country as a whole anyway. So we want to get there, and we want to preserve this story before it does get westernized. And we want to, first of all, build awareness, and then provide inspiration for a call to action. And our main kind of hurdle right now is finding partners. I think our dream partner would be Patagonia. We have a pretty high budget, upwards of near 6 figures, that we hope to get fully funded. And this isn't a project that we want to make a dime off of. But I think that this will allow ourselves to get into a social advocacy kind of mission that we're passionate about along the way, and create really, really inspiring content.
Definitely. Is there a place that people can go to follow up with the Cuba stuff, both if they want to help or if they have some sort of sponsor that could bring on board? And then also, where can people find you or the Locals Project?
Yeah, as far as Cuba is concerned, we're going to make a website that's going to be kind of that platform to share content and allow people to get involved. That hasn't been created yet, but if anybody wants to contact us, they can go to localsproject.com and contact us through there. And then, we have an Instagram at locals_project, where you can see our social strategy and how we tell our stories. And then personally, anybody can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm Jacob Oster. Add me on Facebook or find me on Instagram at oster.jacob. And if anybody wants to get involved with Surf Cuba or knows of anybody, feel free to pass the word along. We have a very, very in-depth pitch deck that tells people exactly what we want to accomplish, where we're going to go, what the budget is, what we plan on producing. So if anybody wants that pitch deck, I'm more than happy to send it out and yeah, get some eyeballs on it.
Awesome. Cool. I'll put some links up in the description for some of that stuff. And we're definitely going to have to get on another podcast, both like just in general and in relation to more of the Cuba stuff as that kind of progresses.
Yeah, I'm down, dude, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I've been hammering this tea and I need to pee so freaking badly. So
go do it. Go drain the lizard.
I will. You have a fantastic rest of your day.
You too, man. Talk to you soon.
Peace.